Midnight. A $1 billion tower, and one man moving through it who should not be there. The cameras caught him where no janitor belongs. Restricted floors, executive machines, a hand rising toward a keypad he was never given the code to. Then 3 seconds of nothing, the feed goes dark, and when it returns, a locked door is easing shut behind him. She watches it again, and again. A woman at the top of the world, certain she is looking at a thief. She is wrong. She just doesn't know how wrong yet, because the quiet man with the mop is not what his file says, because the gaps in his past were carved out on purpose, because somewhere in this city, a secret is waiting that will burn everything she built straight to the ground. Tonight, she follows him into the dark. And the dark has been waiting a long time. The clock on the wall of the executive floor read 11:47 at night, and Adeline Frost had not moved in 20 minutes. She stood at the glass, a thin woman in a dark coat, watching her own reflection hover over a city that never quite went to sleep. The lights of downtown blinked back at her like they knew something she didn't. Below, the streets were empty. Above, only her, the youngest chief executive her company had ever named. 34 years old, 93 days into the job. And already something was wrong. She could feel it the way you feel a draft in a house you thought was sealed. A cold seam somewhere. A place where the walls didn't meet. On her desk, a security monitor glowed. Gray, grainy, silent. And on that screen, a man in a custodial uniform pushed a cleaning cart down a corridor that he had no reason to be in. Not at this hour, not on this floor. His name was Elias Crane, 42 years old according to a file that told her almost nothing. Night janitor, single father, quiet, the kind of man you pass in a hallway and forget before the elevator doors have closed. The kind of man nobody looks at twice. Except she was looking now. She pressed rewind. Watched the cart stop outside the server room. Watched his hand lift toward the keypad. And then the camera shifted the way old cameras do, and for 3 seconds he was simply gone. 3 seconds of nothing. When the picture found him again, the door was closing behind him, soft as a held breath. 3 seconds. That was all it took to lose a man in this building. 3 seconds and a person could disappear entirely. She rewound it again, because she had to be wrong. Because there had to be a reason a man cleaned rooms that weren't on his list at times, when no one was watching in a building, holding a product worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Their new system, the one launching in 12 days, the one that would either make her name or bury it. Her head of security had brought her the footage 2 weeks ago. Roland Beck, a careful man with careful eyes. He had said the word out loud, so she wouldn't have to. Espionage. He had said companies would pay millions for what they were building. He had asked very quietly whether he should call it in, and she had said, not yet, because if they were wrong, they would destroy an innocent man for the crime of doing his job in the dark. And if they were right, and they moved too soon, they would never learn who was paying him. So she had waited. And she had done a thing she told no one about. She had pulled his records herself. Elias Crane had come to the city 7 years ago, the way rain comes to a window. Suddenly. From nowhere. Before that, his history thinned out to almost nothing. General labor, contract work, gaps you could drive a truck through. Nothing that explained the way he moved through her building, careful and certain, like a man who already knew where the valuable things were kept. Her phone buzzed against the glass desk. A message from Priya Malhotra, her head of product. Still here. Need your sign-off before tomorrow. Where are you? Adeline typed back without thinking. Something came up. Send it to my personal email. Another lie. They were stacking up lately, these small ones. Little bricks in a wall she was building without meaning to. She grabbed her coat, and she told herself she was only going to look. The elevator carried her down into the quiet. That strange ringing silence of a place built to hold thousands occupied now by no one. Her heels struck the polished floor too loud, and she slowed, pressed herself to the wall. 20 years she'd spent learning to watch a room before she walked into it. Old habits. They kept you alive in boardrooms. She found him on the 38th floor. The emergency lights washed everything in a sick green glow, and there he was running a vacuum across carpet that cost more than his monthly wage. His movements were smooth, practiced. He wore earbuds and his lips were moving, and for one absurd moment she wondered if he was singing. She ducked behind a partition and pressed a hand to her own chest. This was insane. She was the head of a company worth $1 billion, and she was crouching behind a divider in her own building, hiding from the man who emptied her trash. If Roland could see her now. If anyone could see her now. Her mother, God rest her, would have laughed until she cried. Except she couldn't stop. Because when the man turned off the vacuum and pushed his cart toward the elevators, she followed. And when the doors opened and he stepped inside, she lunged and caught them just before they closed and slipped into the small, bright box beside him. His eyes went wide. Ms. Frost. 2 words, that was all. And in them more surprise than fear, which was not what a guilty man's voice should sound like. She had spent a career reading voices. This one didn't fit the crime. Working late, she said. Not a question. She didn't trust herself with a real one. Always, ma'am. Soft, almost gentle. He looked at her the way you look at someone you're worried about. Didn't expect to see you. Everything all right? And that was the thing that undid her just a little. Because no one asked her that anymore. Not the board, not her staff, not the man who poured her coffee. Everything all right. 2 years since anyone had said it and meant it. I like to know what happens in my building, she said instead. The doors opened on the ground floor. He nodded and pushed his cart out into the lobby, and just before he was gone, he said, "Drive safe, Ms. Frost." Then the doors closed, and she was alone, and her hands were shaking. She should have gone home. She sat in her car, in the dark garage, instead engine off, and she waited. Because that conversation had told her nothing and everything. Because he had been nervous, yes, but not the nervousness of a thief. Something older than that. Something worn in. At 47 minutes past midnight, he came out through the service door. Gone was the uniform. Jeans now, and a work jacket gone soft at the elbows from years of use. He walked to a car that had no business still running. An old sedan, easily 15 years old. A dent punched into the rear bumper. A long crack running the width of the windshield like a river on a map. She started her engine, kept the lights off, and when he pulled out she followed. She knew how this looked. Chief executives did not tail their own employees through the streets at 1 in the morning. They hired people for that. They made calls. They stayed clean. But she couldn't have said why, only that it felt personal in a way she had no words for, and she followed him north away from the glass towers into a part of the city she had lived beside for 8 years and never once seen. The buildings got shorter. The streetlights got fewer, and half of them were dark. Chain-link fences, bars on the windows of corner stores. This was the city that didn't make the postcards. The city that existed underneath the one she flew over. His car turned into a lot beside an old brick building, 3 stories tired. A sign hung above the door, half its bulbs burned out. She could just make out what it once said. Bright Haven Community Center. He didn't go to the front door. He pulled a bag from his trunk and went around the side, quick and sure, a man who had walked this path 100 times. This was no accident, no errand. He came here. She waited 5 minutes, then she crossed the street. The side door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of old paint and something faintly like a swimming pool, chlorine, and thyme. Voices came from somewhere deep in the building, and she followed them down a hallway on silent feet past peeling walls, toward a light spilling out of an open door at the end. She reached the doorway, and she looked. And whatever she had come here expecting to find, it was not this. The room had once been a gymnasium. High ceilings, basketball hoops folded up against the walls. But the floor was covered now in long tables, and the tables were covered in computers. Dozens of them. None of them matched. Some looked ancient, some looked stitched together from the corpses of others. Cables running everywhere in tangled rivers. And every single one of them was on. Children sat at those screens. Teenagers mostly. 13, 14 up to maybe 17. Hunched over keyboards with the fierce total focus of surgeons. Some in hoodies worn thin at the cuffs. Some in clothes that had been mended and mended again. 20 of them easy. Boys and girls, lit blue by the glow. And standing at the front of that room tall, certain alive in a way she had not seen him in the elevator an hour before, was Elias Crane. He was teaching. The quiet janitor was gone. In his place stood a man who commanded the room without raising his voice, who moved between the tables like a conductor before an orchestra, pointing at a screen where lines of code scrolled past. "What I'm showing you here isn't in any book," he was saying. "This is the real thing. The kind of problem-solving that separates somebody who can type from somebody who can build something that lasts." A girl with glasses looked up from her machine. "Mia," he said, "what did I tell you about the shortcut you love so much?" "That it's fast," the girl said. "And that fast is how you end up somewhere you didn't mean to go." He grinned, and the grin took 10 years off his face. Adeline stood frozen in the doorway, and something inside her chest, something she had kept locked for a very long time, shifted on its hinges. Because his file said he had barely finished high school. Because the man in front of her was explaining ideas her own senior engineers had failed to explain to a board of directors that very afternoon. Because she had watched a room full of the highest-paid minds in the industry lose their thread, and here was a man in a second-hand jacket doing it. Better, cleaner, kinder for children. The world had already decided not to see. Who was he? Who was he really? She took a step back to leave, to think, to breathe. And her shoulder caught the edge of the doorframe. A metal bracket scraped the wall, one long, ugly sound in a quiet room. Everything stopped. "Hello?" His voice sharper now. "Somebody there?" She could have run. She should have run. Her feet would not move. He came into the hallway, and the warmth drained out of his face the moment he saw her replaced by something guarded and cold and terribly, terribly tired. Ms. Frost. Not surprise this time. Something worse. The look of a man watching the one safe thing he had built begin to come apart in front of him. And before she could find a single word to explain herself, another voice cut through the hall. Low, steady, iron underneath it. An older woman stepped out of the light behind him, gray hair pulled back, arms already folding across her chest. She looked at Adeline the way a person looks at a wolf that has wandered too close to the door. "What's that?" the woman said. "Look what the night dragged in." And behind them both, one by one, the children were beginning to stand. Odessa. Wren did not move from the doorway, and the children did not sit back down. And for a long moment, the only sound in that old gymnasium was the hum of 30-second-hand computers doing work nobody in this city thought these kids could do. "You followed him," Odessa said. It wasn't a question. She had already done the math. 65 years on this earth teaches a woman how to read a face, and Adeline's face was telling on her. "I did," Adeline said, because there was no lie left worth telling. She had run out of them somewhere on the drive north, somewhere between the glass towers and the burned-out streetlights. So she gave the woman the truth, plain ugly, the way you'd hand over a knife by the blade. "I thought he was stealing from my company." The word landed in the room like a dropped plate. A boy near the front, tall maybe 16, took a step forward. Not toward her, between her and Elias. And that small thing, that instinct in a child to shield the man who'd taught him, cut deeper than anything the older woman could have said. Elias put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's all right, Marcus." "It's not," the boy said. "I know." Elias didn't take his eyes off Adeline. "Go on, all of you. Save your work and shut down. It's late." They didn't want to. She could see it. But they did it anyway, because he asked, and because whatever this man was to them, it was the kind of thing you obey without arguing. One by one, the screens went dark. One by one, the kids gathered their thin backpacks and filed past her in the hall, and every one of them looked at her as they went. Not with fear, with disappointment, which was so much worse. The last to leave was the girl with the glasses, Mia, and she paused in the doorway and looked up at Adeline and said very quietly, "He fixed the heater last winter so we wouldn't freeze. Whatever you think he did, you're wrong about him." Then she was gone, and Adeline was left standing in a hallway that smelled of old paint, in a coat that cost more than every computer in that room, combined feeling something she had not let herself feel in years. Shame. Real shame. The kind that starts in your stomach and climbs. Elias walked back into the gym. He didn't invite her, but he didn't shut the door either, and after a moment she followed because leaving now felt like the cowardly thing, and she had done enough cowardly things tonight. I was already moving down the row of machines, powering the last of them off, coiling loose cables around his hand. He worked the way he'd worked in her building. Careful, thorough, a man who put things back where they belonged. "Where did they come from?" she asked. "The computers." He didn't look up. "Dumpsters mostly. Surplus sales. Places that were throwing them out anyway. They all work. People throw things out long before they stop working." He set a monitor gently down. With the right hands you can make garbage sing. She stood there and watched him, and the questions were piling up behind her teeth, and finally one of them got out. "Your file says you barely finished high school." His hands went still on the cable. For a moment he said nothing at all, and then he turned, and the tiredness in his eyes had a floor to it she couldn't see the bottom of. "My file says a lot of things," he said. "It says I'm a night janitor, 42 years old, single father, quiet, unremarkable." A breath. "That last one people write it without even knowing they're writing it. You want to make a man disappear, that's the word you use." Elias. "You know what I found," he said, When I first walked into your building, a woman on the 4th floor keeps a photo of her son on her desk. Kid in a wheelchair. Every night, I moved that photo before I dusted, and I put it back exactly where it was, because I know what it's like to be scared. Somebody's going to move the things that matter and never put them back. He said it evenly. No heat. And that was what made it terrible. That's what you saw on your cameras, he said. A man in places he shouldn't be. You never once asked why. You just decided. I'm asking now. You're asking now because you followed me to a gym at 2 in the morning, and you've got no way to explain yourself. He picked the cable back up. That's not the same as asking Ms. Frost. That's getting caught. She had been called worse. In boardrooms by men who smiled while they did it. But nothing had ever landed like that, because nothing had ever been so exactly true. Odessa spoke from the doorway. She had not left. Of course she had not left. He's been coming here 4 years, the older woman said. 4 winters. You know how many nights he's missed. Adeline didn't answer. None, Odessa said. Not one. His car breaks down, he takes the bus. Bus doesn't run, he walks. 2 hours in the snow once I watched him come through that door, with ice in his beard. And he taught for 3 hours. And then he went to your building and cleaned it till dawn. She let that sit. So before you go running your investigations, honey, you might ask yourself what kind of thief works 2 jobs to teach other people's children for free. The room was very quiet, and Adeline thought of her own father. Then, though she had not meant to, though she never let herself, she thought of a man in a garage with grease worked so deep into his knuckles it never fully came out. A man who fixed machines for 30 years and was told at 58 that he was no longer needed, that the company had found a cheaper way, and who had sat at the kitchen table that night with his hands folded, like he didn't know what they were for anymore. Unremarkable. That's the word they'd used for him too, without ever saying it. He died 3 years later, and the thing that killed him wasn't in any file either. I should go, Adeline said. Her voice came out wrong, thinner than she wanted. Elias looked at her. Something in her face must have shifted some crack in the polished front because, for the first time, all night, the anger in him gave way to something quieter. Not forgiveness. Nothing so easy. Just a kind of recognition, one tired person seeing another. Yeah, he said. You should. She turned to go, and then she stopped because she couldn't help it, because the thing that had been circling her all night finally landed. How do you know all this? She said. The teaching, the code. That's not something you learn cleaning offices at night. He didn't answer. You were somebody, she said. Before. Weren't you? For one long second, she thought he might tell her. His jaw worked. Some old door opened a crack behind his eyes, and behind it, she could see the shape of a story, huge and dark and heavy, a thing he had spent years learning to carry without letting it show. Then the door closed. I'm the night janitor, he said. That's all you need to know. Now please, these kids have been through enough tonight. Let me lock up. So she left. She walked back down that hallway past the peeling walls out the side door into the cold, and the door clicked locked behind her, and she stood alone in a parking lot in a neighborhood she'd never had a reason to visit beside a battered old car with more miles on it than most families put on 3. And she did not go home for a long time. She sat in her own car instead in the dark, and she watched the last light in the community center go out. She watched Elias Crane come out the side door, shoulders down. Backpack over one arm, and get into that old sedan and drive off into a part of the city she was only now learning existed. She should have felt relief. She'd been wrong about a theft. That was good news for the company. No spy. No leak. Her product was safe. Instead, she felt hollowed out, scraped clean, because a man she'd dismissed with a glance had just shown her a whole life she'd never bothered to look at. And somewhere in it was the answer to a question she suddenly badly needed answered. Who had he been? Because people didn't end up like this by accident. Brilliant men didn't wind up pushing mops through office towers in the middle of the night without a story. And in her world, in the tech world, she'd clawed her way to the top of stories. Like that usually meant one thing. Someone got burned. Someone with power had decided a man was inconvenient and had made him disappear and had gone home and slept just fine. Her phone lit up on the passenger seat. Priya again. And this time the message made her stomach drop through the floor of the car. Beacon is failing stress tests. System conflicts cascading. We might have to delay the launch. Call me. Now. Beacon. Their whole future. The thing she'd bet her name on. An operating system built to put real computing into the hands of people who'd never had access to it. People in neighborhoods, exactly like the one she was parked in, and it was falling apart 12 days before it was supposed to save her. She pressed the phone to her ear and closed her eyes. How bad, she said when Priya picked up. Bad. Her voice was frayed to the last thread. Every time we fix one conflict, 2 more open up. It's like the whole thing's at war with itself. Curtis wants to roll back 3 months of work. Adeline. I don't think we can ship this. Adeline opened her eyes. Through the windshield across the street, the sign above the door of Bright Haven flickered in the dark, half its bulbs burned out, spelling nothing. Make garbage sing, he'd said, with the right hands. Don't roll back anything, Adeline said slowly. Keep the team on it. I'll be in early. We'll figure it out. She hung up before Priya could argue, and she sat there a moment longer in the cold, in the dark, staring at that broken sign, and a thought came to her that she had no business thinking, that made no sense at all, that she tried 3 times to put down and could not. There was a man in this city who could explain things her senior engineers couldn't. A man her cameras had caught in the wrong places, doing the right things in the dark, where nobody bothered to look. A man she'd followed home like a criminal. And come morning, she was going to have to find out exactly who he'd been before the world decided he was no one at all. She turned the key. The engine caught, and Adeline Frost drove back toward the glittering towers that had until about 3 hours ago been the only part of the city she thought was real. Behind her, the last light at Bright Haven went dark. Ahead of her, the whole thing was just beginning. The morning came gray and low, the kind of northwest sky that doesn't so much rise as leak into the day, and Adeline Frost had not slept. She'd tried. She'd lain in her glass apartment 40 floors above a city she'd stopped being able to see, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw a gymnasium full of second-hand light, and a man who moved through it like he'd been born there. By 4, she'd given up. By 5, she was searching. Not for Elias Crane. She'd already learned that name gave up nothing. So she went sideways the way she'd learned to in another life before the corner office back when she was young and hungry and did the digging herself. She searched variations. Initials. E. Crane. Elias. Eli. She cross-referenced the city's tech company's patent filings. Old industry forums. Anything from 7, 8, 9 years back. For 2 hours, nothing. And then, buried in the dead archive of a message board about ethics in software, a screen name. Ecrane Sys. The posts were 9 years old. Dense, technical, the kind of writing that only comes from someone who has forgotten how to talk to people who don't already understand. But it was the last post that stopped her cold, that made her set the coffee down and lean into the screen. I reported the safety flaw through the proper channels. I was told to drop it. I won't. Some things matter more than a paycheck. If this system ships the way it is, people are going to get hurt. And when they do, I want it on record that we were warned. The thread ended there. Ecranesys never posted again. Vanished the way a man vanishes when the world decides it's done with him. She kept pulling. Tech scandals, 9 years ago, safety concerns, whistleblower. It took her another half hour to find it, and when she did, the room seemed to tilt. A defense contractor, Halcyon Systems, a senior architect who'd raised concerns about vulnerabilities in software going into critical infrastructure. The company had buried the concerns, then fired the man for breaking a non-disclosure when he tried to take them to the regulators. 6 months later, the software failed. A power grid went down. 3 million people, 4 days, no lights, no heat in the dead middle of winter. Most articles had scrubbed his name. Lawyers' settlements, the usual erasure. But one small trade paper had run the story before the lawyers arrived, and the headline was still there 9 years later, waiting in the dark for someone to come looking. Defense contractor fires whistleblower. Elias Crane, warned of grid vulnerability. She sat back. There it was, the whole shape of it. A man who had been one of the finest systems minds in the country. A man who'd built the bones of secure networks, half her own company, still ran on. A man who had, when it counted, chosen the truth over his own life and been buried alive for it. Blacklisted. Not fired, blacklisted. Halcyon had used every connection it had to make sure he never worked in the industry again, and it had worked, and a genius had ended up pushing a mop through her building at midnight, because no one would let him hold anything better. Now she understood the bitterness in his voice, the way he'd said unremarkable, like it was a thing that had been done to him. He'd worked for people like her. He'd been destroyed by people like her, and she was about to walk into his life again and ask him for help. She almost didn't. She said it through the drive downtown, through the elevator, through the door of a company that was by the time she reached the 42nd floor already coming apart at the seams. The development lab looked like a war room after the war. Whiteboards buried in equations. Energy drink cans standing in ranks like spent shells. 6 of her best engineers hunched at their screens with the gray, hollowed faces of people who had not gone home. Priya was there, still in yesterday's clothes, her hair scraped back, shadows under her eyes like bruises. And Curtis Ozawa, her chief architect, looked up when she came in, and his face told her everything before he opened his mouth. "Tell me you slept," she said. "Tell me you have good news," he said back. Nobody had good news. "It's not a bug," Curtis said. "That's the problem. We keep treating it like a bug. But every fix opens 2 new failures. The learning modules in Beacon keep trying to optimize system resources in ways that fight the core operating protocols. It's like..." He rubbed his face. "It's like 2 drivers grabbing the same wheel. Neither one will let go. We've tried isolation layers, priority stacks, buffers. Nothing holds. So we rebuild it. We can't rebuild a foundation in 11 days, Adeline." He said it gently, which was worse than if he'd shouted. "The architecture might just be wrong. And if it's wrong, we don't ship. We delay 6 months. We lose the window. We lose to the people who were happy to copy us and wait." Delay meant more than money. She knew that. Delay meant the next chief executive shelving Beacon forever, because it was too risky, and Beacon dying, and a whole idea dying with it. The idea that a kid in a place like the one she'd stood in last night could hold the same tools as a kid in a glass tower. She stood in the wreckage of her own ambition and heard unbidden a voice from a gymnasium. "You're trying to make them talk directly. That's your mistake." She hadn't heard him say that. Not those words. But she'd watched him teach, and she knew the way you know a thing before you can prove it. That the man who'd made garbage sing could look at this and see what 6 people who cost her a fortune could not. "I think I know someone," she said. Curtis frowned. Someone from where? Adeline didn't answer him. She was already reaching for her coat. He was harder to convince than the board would be. She found him at the community center at dusk, setting up for the evening's class, and when he saw her car in that broken lot, the door of his face slammed shut all over again. "No," he said before she'd said a word. "Elias, I know what you found." He didn't stop moving, booting the ancient machines one by one, checking the cables, the way she'd watched him check them the night before. "You went digging. You found Halcyon. And now you're standing in my classroom because your fancy engineers can't fix your billion-dollar toy, and you thought, why not ask the janitor?" "I thought," she said, "why not ask Elias Crane?" His hand stopped. "That man doesn't exist anymore," he said. "He's booting up a room full of dead computers right now." For a long moment, he just looked at her, and the fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and somewhere down the hall, Odessa was moving chairs, and the first of the kids would be here in 20 minutes. "Even if I wanted to," he said finally, and something in the softening of it told her she was winning, "I can't touch your code. The non-disclosure Halcyon put on me is ironclad. I signed away the right to work systems architecture for any competing company for 10 years. I'm 9 years in. 1 more year, and I'm free. Right now, I so much as fix a line of your code, their lawyers bury me and everything I've built here." "Then don't write it," Adeline said. He looked at her. "Teach them," she said. "You don't touch a keyboard. You stand at a whiteboard, and you tell my people what to do. And they do it. Consulting. Not coding. It's legally a different thing." He was quiet, and she saw him doing the math, the same math Odessa had done in the doorway the night before, weighing her, deciding whether she was worth the risk of hoping. "Why would I help you?" he said. "After everything an industry full of people like you did to me." She could have lied. She could have offered money. Instead, she told him the truth, which was becoming a habit around this man. Because Beacon was built to put real tools in the hands of kids, exactly like the ones in that room, she said. "And if it fails, it doesn't just cost me my job. It kills the whole idea, and those kids go back to being invisible the way somebody once decided you were." The gym was silent except for the hum of the machines. "Come inside," Elias said at last. "Show me what's breaking. And Ms. Frost." He looked at her level, unblinking. "The kids come first. I leave every night at 10 to teach. If your project ever gets in the way of that, we're done. Understood?" "Understood," she said. And for the first time since the night began 2 nights ago, she felt something in her chest that wasn't dread. I walked into her building the next morning in the same worn jacket, and the lobby did a double-take that rippled all the way to the elevators. The chief executive and the night janitor riding up together in silence. She'd offered to explain him to the team first to smooth the way. He'd refused. "They need to see me," he'd said, "not hear about me through you. Otherwise they'll dismiss every word because it came from the CEO instead of somebody they respect. They might dismiss it anyway." "Probably." No bitterness in it now. Just fact. That's their problem to solve, not mine. Curtis met them at the lab door, and when Adeline said Elias Crane is going to consult on the integration problem, the silence that followed had a texture to it. You could have leaned against it. No disrespect, Curtis said carefully. But who is he? I don't know the name from any of the firms. I'm the man who cleans your office, Elias said. Flat, no shame in it. And 9 years ago I was a senior systems architect at Halcyon. Before that I helped write the security protocols half your frameworks still run on. You've got no reason to believe me. If I were you, I wouldn't either. But your CEO asked me to look at your problem. So here I am. One of the younger engineers frowned. Halcyon. Weren't they the whistleblower thing, the grid? I was the whistleblower, Elias said. I reported it. I got fired. I spent 7 years unemployable. That's the short version. The long version doesn't matter right now. What matters is your system is failing because you're treating a governance problem like a communication problem. Curtis crossed his arms. We've tried governance. Priority hierarchies, decision trees, buffers. The overhead kills us or the conflicts cascade anyway. Because you're building your governor from scratch. Elias was already moving toward the whiteboard, uncapping a marker, and Adeline watched the change come over him again the way it had in the gym. The straightening of the spine. The certainty. You don't need to. There's an open-source framework. Handles distributed resource management for server clusters. The core logic does exactly the conflict resolution you need. You adapt it. You don't reinvent it. He began to draw, and the room, slowly against its own, began to lean in. Boxes, arrows, a structure that grew more complex and more elegant with every stroke. And as he drew, he talked, and as he talked, he pointed out the weaknesses in their approach one by one. Not cruelly, never cruelly, but the way a doctor names a thing so it can finally be treated. You're trying to make 2 systems share the wheel, he said. Stop. Give them a third thing. A conductor. Something that sits above both of them, takes what each one wants and decides. Not a buffer passing notes back and forth. A referee with authority. Curtis stepped closer to the board, studied it, and something in the set of his shoulders changed. This could actually work, he said slowly, grudgingly, like the words cost him. The logic is clean, but adapting open source to our proprietary systems. I understand both, Elias said. I can guide your team through it. Where to modify the framework. How to wire it into your learning protocols. Where to build the fail-safes for the cases you haven't even hit yet. How long? Good team working hard 48 hours to a working prototype. Another day to test. He capped the marker, but only if you actually listen to me, instead of throwing it out, because of who's holding them up. The challenge hung there, and Adeline watched 6 proud, exhausted people wrestle with the thing they'd been raised in this industry to believe that expertise came with a degree and a salary and a certain kind of face, and that this man had none of those. All right, Curtis said finally. We'll try it your way. Good, said Elias. Then let's get to work. The hours blurred. The lab, which had been a tomb, turned into something that hummed. Elias moved from station to station, catching errors, before they grew. Translating the impossible into the merely difficult. And he had that same gift she'd seen with the children, the ability to meet a person exactly where they stood and walk them one step forward. No look, he told one engineer leaning over her shoulder. You're forcing the framework to mirror your old priority system. Don't. Let it work the way it wants to. Teach your side to speak its language, instead of making it speak yours. The engineer stared at her screen, and then her whole face opened. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that's if we restructure the requests as resource queries instead of priority flags. Now you're thinking like the system," Elias said, instead of at it. Adeline watched from the doorway, taking calls she barely heard, unable to make herself leave. Because there was something in watching him work that she couldn't look away from. This was who he was supposed to be. This was the life that had been taken from him by an industry that valued silence over truth. And she had helped build that industry. She had climbed it, and she'd never once looked down. It was a little past noon when Roland Beck appeared at her elbow, and the look on his face pulled her out of the moment like a bucket of cold water. "We need to talk," he said low. "About Crane." "Not now, Roland. Now." He drew her out into the hall away from the glass. "I pulled more footage. He hasn't just been in the restricted floors. He's been accessing executive computers. Yours. Others. Middle of the night. 10-15 minutes at a time. It's systematic, Adeline. And now you've walked him straight into our most sensitive project." The floor seemed to shift under her. "I don't care how good he is," Roland said. "That's a breach. I think we take it to the police." She looked past him through the glass to where Elias was crouched beside a monitor, explaining something with his hands, and 3 engineers were nodding like students. "Give me until end of day," she said. "Adeline, end of day. If I can't get an answer that makes sense, we go to the authorities. I promise." She held his eyes until he looked away. "Look at him, Roland. Does that look like a spy to you?" "The good ones never do," he said, and left her there. And the clock, which had been counting down toward a launch, was suddenly counting down toward something else. By 4 in the afternoon, the impossible had started to look merely unlikely. The framework was loading, integrating. The error logs that had been screaming for 2 days had begun one by one to quiet. It wasn't fixed. There were bugs, still edge cases, the long grind of testing ahead. But for the first time, there was a road. "Take a break," she told the team. "Eat something. Come back in an hour. We're going to be here late." They scattered, grateful. Elias stayed at the whiteboard, staring at his own work, the way a man checks a bridge he's about to send people across. She came and stood beside him. "You did that," she said. "They did that. You know what I mean." He set the marker down. And then, because the end-of-day clock was ticking and she was out of gentle ways to do it, she said it. "The cameras caught you in my office, on my laptop, more than once, middle of the night." She kept her voice, even no accusation in it, just the plain shape of the thing. "I need to know what you were doing, Elias, before someone else decides for both of us." Something flickered across his face. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to the weariness of a man who'd known this was coming. He pulled out his phone, opened a folder, and handed it to her without a word. Photographs. Screen after screen. Code from her company's security infrastructure. And threaded through them in careful annotation in a handwriting she was oddly moved to find neat and precise notes. Vulnerabilities, backdoors, flaws that made her stomach drop as she scrolled dozens of them, each one documented, each one with a fix suggested underneath. "You were auditing us," she breathed. "I saw the same thing I saw at Halcyon," he said quietly. "A company growing so fast that security became an afterthought. Everybody chasing features, nobody watching the doors. I started noticing while I cleaned. Passwords on sticky notes, screens left unlocked. Sensitive data just sitting there, in the open. So I looked deeper. By getting into executive computers. I'm a janitor. Who is going to listen to a janitor file a security report? He took the phone back. By the time I understood how bad it was, I knew I had to document everything before I said a word. Because I've been here before. I know how it ends when a man like me speaks up without proof. She stared at him. You've got 3 separate ways into your customer database, he said. Your development servers could be cracked by a second-year student. And your financial systems. He stopped. Something changed in his voice. That's the part you need to hear. What about the financial systems? Somebody's already inside them. The hallway noise seemed to drop away. 3 weeks ago, I found evidence of unauthorized access, Elias said. Somebody siphoning money. Small amounts. Nothing big enough to trip an alarm. But steady. Disguised as routine operational costs. Whoever it is knows this system well enough to hide inside its noise. He met her eyes. As far as I can trace it right now, and maybe 50,000. But I don't think I've found the bottom of it. And it's still happening. Corporate theft. On top of everything. On top of a failing product and a launch 10 days out, she should have felt fury. Instead, she felt something almost like awe. Because this man whom she had hunted like a criminal, whom the world had thrown away, had been quietly standing guard over a company that had given him nothing but a mop and a minimum wage, and her suspicion. Do you know who? She said. I have a guess, he said. But a guess isn't proof, and I've paid too much already for accusing powerful people without proof. Give me 3 days and real access. I'll give you a name. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she made a decision that would within 24 hours put her whole career in front of a firing squad. You have full access, she said. Whatever you need. Adeline, find whoever's doing this. Her voice was steady now, steadier than she felt. And Elias, thank you, for protecting a company that gave you every reason not to. He shook his head. I'm not protecting the company. I'm protecting the people it forgot to. Before she could answer, her phone erupted in her hand. Priya, Curtis, 2 board members, all at once, all the same message. She lifted it to her ear, bracing for disaster. And instead she heard Priya, breathless, half-laughing, half-crying. Adeline, Adeline, it passed. The first stress test. It held. The whole thing held. No crashes. No cascade. It's working. Oh my God, it's actually working. The lab when she and Elias reached it had erupted. Engineers who'd been dead on their feet an hour ago were on their feet now for a different reason. Laughing, gripping each other's shoulders, the giddy hysteria of people who had stared into the pit and been pulled back. Curtis had his hands laced behind his head, looking at the ceiling like a man saying a prayer he'd forgotten the words to. And in the middle of all of it stood Elias Crane, apart a little outside the circle, watching them celebrate the thing he'd given them. Still the janitor to them. Still the man who'd gotten lucky with one good idea. Adeline crossed the room, and she took him by the arm, and she pulled him into the light, into the middle of them, and she raised her voice so the whole lab could hear it over the noise. This happened because of him, she said. Every one of you did brilliant work, but we would still be drowning right now if this man hadn't walked in and shown us the way. So when we launch Beacon, when the whole industry is applauding you, remember whose hands made it sing. The room went quiet, and then, one by one, they began to clap. Some of them warmly, some of them still uncertain, still working out how to celebrate a man they'd dismissed that morning. But it was a start. It was recognition offered where recognition was owed. Elias didn't smile. He looked, if anything, overwhelmed, a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Adeline stepped back beside him, and under the noise, so only he could hear, she said the thing she'd already decided somewhere between the whiteboard and the cheering. "You're not cleaning offices anymore." He turned to look at her. "I'm creating a position," she said. "Chief Security Architect. You lead the audit. You fix every hole you found. You catch whoever's stealing from us. You report to me." "Adeline," his voice was rough, "your board will lose their minds. Your investors will think you've cracked. Your people will revolt at the idea of answering to the man who used to empty their trash." "Then they can find other jobs," she said. And she meant it. God help her, standing in that noise, in that light, with a man the world had erased, finally briefly visible. She meant every word. "You told me people like me close ranks instead of standing up," she said. "You were right. I'm trying to be the other kind now. So let me." He looked at her for a long, long moment. And somewhere far below them, in a system full of hidden doors, a thief who had been careful and quiet for 8 long months felt for the first time the floor begin to shift. But that was tomorrow's storm. Tonight, the room was cheering, and the light was warm, and a good man was for one shining hour exactly where he was always supposed to be. For 6 weeks, the impossible held. Beacon didn't just survive its stress tests, it sailed through them. The conductor Elias had drawn on that whiteboard grew into something real, something elegant, a third mind, sitting quietly between the AI and the operating system, settling their fights before they could start. The launch went out on a cold Friday morning ahead of schedule, and the system performed like a thing that had never known trouble in its life. The industry called it revolutionary, and Adeline Frost, standing in her glass office watching the stock ticker climb, let herself believe for the first time since she took the job that she might actually be good at this. She should have known better. Because a woman doesn't claw her way to the top of anything without learning one hard law. The quiet is never peace. The quiet is the breath a wave takes before it turns over. The wave came on a Wednesday, 2:15 in the afternoon. It came as an email. Roland Beck forwarded it to her with a subject line that made her cold before she'd read a word of the body. "We have a serious problem." She opened it. A journalist, a real one from a real outlet, the kind that didn't run stories to be nice. "I was requesting comment on allegations that Elias Crane Meridian's controversial new chief security architect had accessed confidential client data without authorization and shared proprietary company information with outside parties. He said he had documentation. Screenshots, access logs, email records. He was running the story in 24 hours, with or without her response. Adeline read it once, then again, then a third time, because surely, if she read it enough, the words would rearrange themselves into something that wasn't the end of everything she'd bet her name on. They didn't. She called Roland before she'd finished breathing. "Tell me it's fake," she said. "I wish I could." His voice was tight. "He sent me what he has. Access logs with Crane's credentials pulling client files. Email metadata showing proprietary code going to an external server. Adeline, if this is real, it's a fireable offense on the light end. On the heavy end, it's espionage, and we're talking criminal charges." "Elias wouldn't do this." "Then somebody wants us to think he did." A pause. "Where is he right now?" "His office." "Get him," Roland said, "before the board hears. Because when Richard Kane sees this, He's going to have both your heads on the wall by dinner." She found Elias exactly where he'd said he would be, surrounded by monitors, a man who'd finally been given the tools to do the work he was built for. He looked up when she came in, and whatever he saw on her face made him stand. "What happened?" "There are allegations," she said, and her voice came out flat and strange, a voice reading a verdict. "That you accessed client data, that you sold company secrets. A journalist has it. He's running it tomorrow." The color left his face. "That's not possible," he said. "I haven't touched a client file except through the audit. I haven't sent anything anywhere." "I know." "Then somebody built this." "I know that too." She was already at the door. "Which is why we're going to Roland. And we're going to look at it together. Before anyone else gets to." Roland had it up across 3 screens when they walked in, and it was, Adeline had to admit, beautiful work. Access logs time-stamped Elias's username and credentials, pulling sensitive files in the dead of night. Email records his account, sending encrypted packages to a server that traced back to nowhere. Every line of it pointed one direction. Every arrow ended at the same man. "This is fabricated," Elias said. And he didn't say it like a man protesting. He said it like a man reading a book he'd read before. He leaned in, scanning. "Look at the timestamps." "I've looked at the timestamps," Roland said. "That's the problem. They're clean." "They're too clean," Elias pointed. "This one. 2:40 in the morning 3 weeks back. I was at the community center. I have 20 witnesses. I was teaching a 14-year-old how to close a security loop, which is the funny part, and I was nowhere near a company machine. Can you prove that—" Roland's voice was not unkind. But it was a security man's voice, and security men deal in what can be proven. "Camera's location. Data anything hard. The center doesn't have cameras." Elias's jaw worked. "We can barely afford heat." And there it was, the trap closing. Because the very thing that made him good, the very poverty of the place he'd chosen to pour his life into, left him with no way to prove where his life had been. But then he went very still. I was looking at the logs again. Not at the timestamps this time. At the pattern of the access itself, the order of the queries, the shape of how the files had been pulled. "I know this," he said quietly. "Know what?" "This methodology. I've seen it before." He turned to Roland. "Pull up my audit files. The financial theft. The one I flagged. Put it next to this." Roland hesitated, then did it. 2 sets of logs side by side across the glowing screen. And even Adeline, who could read code the way she could read Latin enough to know it was saying something not enough to know what could see it. The rhythm was the same. The care was the same. The exact patient way the tracks were covered, wiped, disguised as ordinary traffic. "It's the same hand," Elias said. "Whoever's been stealing from you is the same person framing me right now." Roland looked at him for a long moment. "That's a hell of a claim," he said. "Then give me 2 hours and full access," Elias said, "and I'll turn it into a fact." Adeline watched the 2 men look at each other, watched Roland weigh it, and she understood the size of what she was about to do. Because if she gave a man accused of a breach the keys to the whole system, and he used them to burn the evidence, she wouldn't just lose her job. She'd lose the right to have ever fought for him. "Do it," she said. Roland's head came around. "Adeline, if that story runs tomorrow, Elias is finished, whether he did it or not." Her voice didn't shake, and she was proud of that later when she remembered it. "The board will make me fire him. Probably fire me. And whoever actually did this walks away clean, while a good man takes the fall. Again. She looked at Elias. I'm not watching that happen twice. Find them. So he sat down. And for 2 hours, Adeline and Roland watched a man work the way a surgeon works when the patient on the table is his own name. He barely spoke. He pulled logs, traced addresses, followed threads back through the system's memory layer under layer, and every so often he'd mutter something to himself, a fragment, a number, a curse. Until at last, he stopped. There, he said, soft, almost gentle, the way you'd point out something terrible so as not to startle it. That's where it starts. He tapped the screen. 3 weeks ago, somebody made a mirror of my credentials. Not a copy of my password. A duplicate authentication token. Registers as me in every log. Every action taken with it shows up as Elias Crane. He sat back. But I never did any of it. Somebody's been wearing my name like a coat. Who can make a token like that? Roland asked. Anybody with admin access to the authentication servers. How many people is that? Elias pulled up a list, studied it. 12. System admins, senior engineers, executive leadership. Still too many, Adeline said. Narrow it. Already am. His fingers moved. The token was created at 3 in the morning. A Tuesday, 3 weeks back. He was cross-referencing now the building's own access logs, the badge readers, the record of who had walked where and when. Only one person with admin rights was in this building at that hour. He pulled the footage. The image was poor. Grainy gray, a security camera on the 43rd floor, the executive level, looking down at a workstation in the dark. But it was clear enough. A man. Older. Well-dressed even at 3 in the morning, because some men don't know how to be anything else. Sitting at a terminal that wasn't his doing a thing he had no business doing. And Adeline knew him. She knew him the way you know the furniture in the house you grew up in, because he had been there since before she arrived. Because his name was on the walls of this company, on the founding papers on the plaque in the lobby. Gideon Thorne, founding board member, former chief technology officer, one of the most respected figures Meridian had ever produced. A man who had shaken her hand on her first day and told her with those kind gray eyes that the company was lucky to have her. No, she said. It came out of her without permission. No, that's Gideon helped build this place. Which gave him the keys to every lock in it, Elias said quietly. He knows the systems better than anyone alive. He knew exactly where the money was, exactly how to hide it. And when my audit started getting close, he knew exactly who to hang it on. A grim, tired shape at the corner of his mouth. Who's the board going to believe, the founder or the janitor? The room was silent, and Adeline sat down slowly in Roland's chair because her legs had stopped being sure of themselves, and she stared at the grainy man on the screen, and she felt the last comfortable belief she had about the world quietly go out like a bulb at Brighthaven. Because she'd learned in one long night that a janitor could be a genius. And now she was learning the crueler half of the same lesson, that a man everyone trusted could be a thief. We take it to the board, she said. Now, before that story runs. And say what? Roland's face was gray. That a founding member's been robbing the company blind and framing our controversial new hire to cover it. Richard already thinks you've lost your mind, Adeline. This is going to sound like a drowning woman grabbing at anything that floats. Then we don't sound like anything. Elias was already reaching for a keyboard. We build it so tight, there's no room to argue. Every transaction, every log, Every piece of forensics laid out in order, and we let the facts do the talking. No theories, no accusations, just what happened. So they worked. They worked through the afternoon and into the night, and the office emptied around them, and the cleaning crew came through, and Adeline watched a man who used to be that cleaning crew build the case that would either save both their lives or end them. By 6 in the morning, they had it. 8 months of Gideon Thorne laid bare. And it was worse than Elias's first trace had suggested in 50,000, but more than 200 small transfers stacked patiently one on another until they became a fortune. Client data accessed, and they now suspected, quietly sold. And finally, in cold detail, the frame job, the mirrored token, the manufactured logs, the story built to destroy a man who'd already been destroyed once, on the theory that no one would come to his defense a second time. The emergency board meeting was called for 8. Adeline walked into it running on no sleep and something harder than adrenaline, and Elias walked in beside her, carrying a laptop that held either their salvation or their ruin. Richard Kane sat at the head of the table, and he looked. God help her. Pleased a man who'd been waiting a long time to watch her fail and believed the day had finally come. 2 other board members flanked him, and 1 empty chair. "Where's Gideon?" one of them asked. "He called in this morning," Richard said. "Said he wasn't feeling well. He'll join remotely if we need him." "He won't be joining at all," Adeline said, "because this meeting is about him." She watched the confusion ripple across their faces, and then she opened the laptop and she began. She didn't rush. She didn't accuse. She walked them through it exactly the way Elias had built it, brick by brick, the audit, the financial irregularities, the 8-month bleed. Then the frame, the token, the fabricated logs, the careful architecture of a lie designed to bury an innocent man before he could speak. She watched their faces change as she went. Skepticism first, then unease, then something close to horror as the full shape of the betrayal rose up out of the numbers. "You're accusing Gideon Thorne of theft," Richard said, and his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Adeline, he's a founder. 15 years. 15 years of knowing every system in this building," Elias said quietly. It was the first he'd spoken. He pulled up the footage. "This is him creating my credentials. This is him using them. This is him sending code to a shell company he controls." He walked them through each frame clinical patient, anticipating every objection before it could form. "I'm not asking you to take my word. I'm the janitor. You've got no reason to trust me. So don't. Trust the logs. The logs don't have a job to lose." The board sat in a silence you could have heard a pin drop into. "Call him Emeka Diallo," the lead investor said. His voice was hard. "Right now. On speaker. Let him answer for himself." They called. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and his voice came into the room, warm and careful. A grandfather's voice, and Adeline felt something twist in her, because she had liked this man. "I heard there's an emergency meeting," Gideon said. "What's this about?" "Gideon," said the board member who'd dialed, "we have evidence that you've been involved in theft from the company, and that you tried to frame Elias Crane to cover it. We need you to address these allegations." The silence on the line stretched so long that Adeline thought the call had dropped. And then Gideon Thorne laughed. It was a soft sound. Bitter. The laugh of a man who's been holding his breath for 8 months and has just at last let it go. "Of course," he said. "Of course it was the janitor who caught me. I should have known better than to underestimate a man who survived Halcyon." The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard had gone white. The others didn't move. "Why?" Emeka said. Just that. One word from a man who'd known Gideon 20 years. "Because equity doesn't pay a hospital," Gideon said, and now his voice broke, and the grandfather in it fell away and left something raw underneath. "Because a salary doesn't cover the treatment insurance calls experimental. Because respect and reputation, and my name on this building, none of it keeps a woman alive, when the only thing that will is money I didn't have and couldn't get." Adeline closed her eyes. "My wife is sick," Gideon said. "Marlene, cancer. The good kind of bad they told me if we could pay for the treatment that wasn't approved. So I asked the board. 2 years ago. I asked for a loan against my own equity, and you told me no, it would set a precedent. I asked about a hardship fund, and you told me it wasn't policy." A ragged breath. "So I found another way. And before any of you judge me, ask yourselves what you'd do. If the person loved most in the world was dying by inches, and the only thing standing between them and one more year was money you could see but couldn't touch." The moral weight of it crashed over the room, and Adeline felt it land on her chest like a stone. Because he was a thief. He had stolen. He had tried to bury an innocent man alive. All of that was true, and none of it stopped being true. And also, his wife was dying, and he had done a terrible thing to save her, and there was a version of that story where anyone in that room might have done the same. It was Elias who spoke into the silence. Elias of all people. The man Gideon had tried to destroy. "What you did was still theft," he said, and his voice was gentle, but it did not bend. "And framing me didn't just risk me. It risked my students, her career." A glance at Adeline. "The safety of everyone who trusts this company. Your pain is real, Gideon, but your pain doesn't get to become somebody else's ruin." "I know," Gideon whispered. "I've known every day for 8 months." A long pause. "But I'd do it again. For her. In a heartbeat. You can't understand that until you've watched someone you love disappear a little more each morning, and known that the only thing standing between them and the end is money." "How is she now?" one of them asked, quietly. "Your wife." "In remission." His voice cracked clean through. "It worked. She has a chance." A breath like hearing paper. "So I got what I paid for, and I'll pay whatever the rest of it costs." Richard found his voice at last, and it was heavy. "You'll resign," he said, "immediately. You'll return every dollar, and we'll decide whether this goes to the police or gets handled quietly." "I expected nothing less," Gideon said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. To all of you, but most of all to you, Mr. Crane. You didn't deserve to be caught up in this. I told myself that framing a man who'd already lost everything wouldn't cost as much as framing a man with something left to lose." A pause. "I was wrong. There's no such thing as a man with nothing left to lose." The call ended, and the board sat in the wreckage of a betrayal that had come from exactly the place none of them had thought to look. Emeka Diallo was the first to speak, and when he did, he was looking straight at Elias. "Well, Hesser," he said, "you just proved beyond any doubt that you belong exactly where Adeline put you. You caught a thief none of us suspected. You saved this company twice in 6 weeks." He shook his head slowly. "I owe you an apology. I questioned whether someone with your history belonged in this room. You've answered that question better than I ever could have." Even Richard's stiff, grudging Richard gave a single nod. "You've earned your place," he said. "I still think her methods were reckless, but I can't argue with the man in front of me." Elias didn't look triumphant. He looked, if anything, unbearably tired. A man who had won a fight he'd never wanted to be in. "I was right about one thing," Elias said quietly. "I have lost everything before. I know what it does to a person." He looked around the table. His wife just survived cancer. Does she need to lose her husband to a prison cell on top of it? He stole money, not lives. He can pay it back. He can resign, and that can be enough. "The law doesn't work that way," Richard said. "The law allows for choices," Elias said, "and I'm choosing to show a man mercy he never showed me, because I've learned something these 7 years that none of you will find in a spreadsheet." He paused. "Cycles of ruin don't end on their own. They end when one person decides to stop the wheel. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of watching it turn." Adeline looked at the man she'd once followed through the dark streets of a city she thought she knew, certain she was chasing a thief. "And she thought I came looking for the worst in a stranger. And I found the best in one instead." The journalist's story never ran. Her people gave him the whole truth instead of the ugly half he'd been handed. Not the accusations against Elias, but the real story. The theft. The frame. And the janitor turned security chief who had working through the night on the strength of his own good name, uncovered all of it. The story that finally published carried a very different headline. "Security Chief Uncovers Insider Theft at Meridian Technologies. Elias Crane went from suspected criminal to celebrated investigator in the space of a single news cycle." And the irony of that, how close the arrow had come to landing the other way. How completely the world reshapes a man depending on which version of him reaches it first, was not lost on Adeline. It should have felt like victory. But she found Elias at the window of his office late that evening, looking down at a city going dark, and there was no victory in the set of his shoulders. Only wait. "You should enjoy this," she said. "You were right." They apologized. Richard Kane said the words, "I was wrong about you," out loud. I didn't think the man's mouth could form them. "I don't feel vindicated," Elias said, and he didn't turn from the glass. "I feel sad. For Gideon. For what a person will do when the world backs them into a corner and calls it their fault. And I feel—" He stopped. "The industry that erased me 9 years ago and the industry that's calling me a hero this week. They're the same industry, Adeline. It didn't change. It just found a story it liked better." She stood beside him, and she thought about her father, and the word they'd never quite said to his face, and how a man can be crushed by the exact same machine that hands medals to the ones it happens to like. "So what do we do about it?" she asked. "How do we build something that's real instead of just good press?" For the first time in days, something like hope moved across his face. But that she would learn was the beginning of a different fight. And it would ask more of her than any board meeting ever had, because the last thing left to save wasn't the company. It was a girl, 19 years old, working a cash register across town, who hadn't spoken to her father in a very long time. The idea, when it came, did not come from Adeline. It came from Elias, standing at that same window a week later, watching the city he'd once cleaned in the dark. And it was not a small idea. Small ideas were not. She'd learned the kind he had. "We build the thing I should have asked you for," he said, "instead of the title you gave me." She waited. "Not a job for me," he said. "A door. For them. Real ones in real neighborhoods with real machines and real teachers who actually know what they're doing. And a bridge from those rooms into rooms like this one. He turned. Meridian funds it. All of it. And we stop pretending talent only grows in the places we already look. She could have said the board would never allow it. She said it anyway because it was true, and because she'd learned this man preferred the truth, even when it was inconvenient. Then I'll walk away and run it myself, he said. Simply, the work matters more than the office. And she believed him, which was the terrifying part. So she fought for it. She stood in front of the same board that had nearly ended her, and she asked them for $2 million and 4 years for something that would never show up cleanly on a quarterly report. Richard called it a drop in the ocean. And Elias, who had come to speak, looked at Richard and said the thing Adeline would carry with her for the rest of her life. Every program that ever changed anything, he said, started as a drop in the ocean. 10 rooms, 200 kids. Those kids grow up and become the thing this whole industry keeps saying it can't find. Change doesn't come in one grand gesture. It comes in small things, done over and over, until the ocean is a different ocean. Emeka Diallo asked him what his stake was, beyond the obvious, and Elias was quiet a long moment, long enough that Adeline wondered if he'd answer at all. My daughter loved computers, he said finally. When she was small, she wanted to build things like her old man. And then I lost everything. And we lost the house, and she ended up in a school with no lab and no hope. And one day she just stopped. Stopped talking about building things. Stopped believing she was the kind of person who got to. His voice was very level, which was how she knew what it cost. I can't get that back. That door is closed. But I can hold other doors open so that some other father doesn't have to watch his child stop believing. That's my stake. I'm trying to save kids who used to be her. Nobody said anything for a moment. And then the vote passed. 4-1. Richard alone dissenting to the end. It was enough. The program launched in January, and it started at Bright Haven, where all of it had started in the gymnasium, where a woman in an expensive coat had once stood in a doorway and gotten everything wrong. The difference the money made was immediate, and it broke something open in Adeline's chest to watch it. New machines where salvaged garbage had sung. Real internet, so no child ever again lost an hour of work to a dying router. Software licenses so kids could learn the tools the industry actually used instead of the free ones. Elias had spent years teaching them to make do with. Odessa ran it. Of course she did. 65 years old, and she took to the logistics of 10 community centers, the way a general takes to a map. And the first time Adeline called her ma'am, the older woman laughed for a full 10 seconds. Honey, Odessa said, you followed that man home like a burglar, and now you're building him an empire. Life's a strange river. It is, Adeline said. You did good, though. Odessa looked at her, and the wolf wariness of that first night was gone from her eyes. Took you a wrong turn to get here, but you got here. The program grew. 2 more centers by February, all 10 by March. And Adeline made a point of visiting each one, not for photographs, not for the press, but because she'd spent 34 years flying over a city, and she was done doing that. She met Mia, who was teaching now, who talked about studying computer science in the fall, like it was a real thing that real people like her got to do. She met Marcus, the boy who'd stepped between her and Elias that first night, whose photography had won him a scholarship. She met dozens of them, and she learned their names, and their names she found were the whole point. Because a person becomes visible the moment somebody bothers to learn their name. That was the thing the world had done to Elias, and to her father, refused them their names. And once you do that, you can do anything to a person. She was not going to be that anymore. 6 months in, they held a graduation. 30 teenagers in a rented hall, receiving certificates and donated laptops and letters of recommendation that would open doors their parents had never been allowed near. Elias gave the speech, and it was short and it was honest the way he was. You did this, he told them. The money helped, but the money didn't sit up until 2 in the morning when the code wouldn't run. You did. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you only made it because somebody was kind to you. You made because you're good and because you refuse to quit. Remember that. On the days the world tries to make you feel small, you remember that. Adeline watched their faces as they listened, and she understood finally what she'd been watching all these months. I wasn't teaching them to code. He was teaching them to believe they were allowed to. And after, in the noise and the cake and the crying parents, a young woman came toward Adeline through the crowd. Thin. Tired in a way 19-year-olds shouldn't be tired. A grocery store polo showing under a worn jacket she hadn't had time to change out of. "Ms. Frost," she said. "I'm June Crane." A breath. Elias's daughter. And Adeline's heart stopped just for a beat, because he'd spoken of her exactly once and never suggested she'd come. And here she was. Here she was. "It's wonderful to meet you," Adeline managed. "Not much, I'd guess." June's mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "We're not really close. Haven't been since I was 13. Since everything fell apart." She looked out at the celebrating kids, and the pain that crossed her face was an old pain worn smooth from carrying. "I heard about the program, about what he's doing for these kids. I wanted to see it for myself." "He's proud of you," Adeline said gently. June shook her head. "He's disappointed in me. I gave up on the things he taught me to love. I stopped trying when it got hard." Her voice was flat, protecting itself. "And now I look at these kids getting everything I should have had, and She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Because Adeline knew that particular grief. The grief of the person who stopped believing, looking at the people who didn't. And she opened her mouth to say something, anything, and never got the chance. Because Elias was there. He'd seen his daughter across the room, and he'd crossed it. And now he stood a careful few feet away, the space between them thick with years. Neither of them knew how to cross. They had the same eyes. That was the thing that undid Adeline. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jaw, and the same distance in how they stood, two people who'd once been a family and had forgotten the shape of it. "June," he said, just her name, like it was fragile. "You came. I wanted to see what was more important than us," June said. And the words were light, but the wound underneath them was not. "Nothing was ever more important than you," he said. "Everything I do, all of it, it's because I failed you once. And I couldn't stand the thought of another kid feeling the way you felt." "You didn't fail me, Dad." Her voice cracked on the word. "Dad. The world failed us both. You were just trying to keep us alive." She wiped at her eyes, furious at herself for it. "But you disappeared into it. You worked yourself to bone, and even when you were home, you weren't there. And now you're giving all of it, all that time, all that care to these kids. To strangers who remind you of me. And I'm supposed to just be happy about that." The rawness of it silenced the little pocket of the room around them. "You're right," Elias said. And he didn't defend himself, which was, Adeline thought the bravest thing she'd ever seen a man do. I wasn't there the way you needed. I was so busy keeping us afloat that I lost the reason I was doing it. I can't undo that. God knows I've tried. But I can try to make sure your loss means something. That's the only way I've found to live with it. By replacing me, June's voice broke wide open. That's not making it mean something, Dad. That's just that substitution. June. His voice was gone now, wrecked. I don't know how to fix what broke between us. I've called. I've written. You keep pushing me away, and I understand why I failed you when you needed me most, but I swear to you, I'm not trying to replace you. I'm trying to honor you. Because you're the reason I know these kids matter. You taught me that, by being the one I lost. The two of them stood there, years of silence, missed birthdays that were only cards, phone calls that went to voicemail on purpose, all of it hanging in the air between a father and a daughter who had loved each other the whole time and hadn't known how to say it. Adeline knew she should leave, give them the room, but she couldn't move. What if I wanted to come back? June said. So quietly, Adeline almost missed it. Not to computers, or any of that. To you. To having a dad again, instead of a polite stranger who tries too hard. Elias's face broke open. Hope terrible and total rushing up through the exhaustion. I would want nothing more, he said. June, you are my daughter. You always come before any job, any program, any of it. I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you didn't. I need you to actually be there, she said. Not just in the room. There. Not planning the next lesson while I'm talking. I can do that, he said. I will do that. Tell me what you need. Dinner. June wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and now she was almost laughing, that terrible wet laugh of grief turning into something else. Once a week. Just us. No phone. No work talk. A breath. And this is going to sound stupid, but maybe you could teach me again. Like you did when I was little. Before everything. I miss that version of us. That doesn't sound stupid at all, Elias said. And now he was crying too. This man who'd stood unbroken in front of a board that wanted to end him. This man who'd shown mercy to the person who tried to bury him. I was crying freely in a rented hall full of strangers. June, I would love that. More than anything in this whole world. And she stepped into him. She crossed the lasset of that distance, the distance of years, and she put her face against her father's shoulder, the way she must have when she was small, before any of it fell apart, and Elias Crane held his daughter like she might dissolve if he let go. Adeline slipped away, because this was theirs, because some doors you don't stand in the doorway of. She'd learned that one the hard way, hadn't she, in a gymnasium a lifetime ago. She went out into the evening. Cool air, the smell of rain coming. And she stood in the parking lot of a community center in a neighborhood she'd never had a reason to visit before this whole strange season of her life began. And she understood standing there that she had been looking for redemption in the wrong place. She'd thought Elias's redemption was saving other people's children, atoning for the one he couldn't save. But that wasn't it. That was never it. His redemption was the girl inside crying into his shoulder. The one he'd thought was lost for good, not other kids in place of his daughter. His daughter. Come home at last. An hour later, they came out together, the two of them walking close, talking in the easy, broken way of people relearning a language they used to be fluent in. And when Elias saw Adeline waiting by her car, he smiled, and it was a smile she'd never seen from him. Unguarded. Whole. Thank you, he said, for all of it. You did the work, she said. I just stopped looking away. That's not nothing, Adeline. He held her eyes. You stood up for me when there was no reason to. You put your whole career on a table and pushed it toward a man you'd known 3 days. That's everything. June looked at her. Ms. Frost, she said. Why did you risk it all? For my dad. And Adeline thought about it. Really thought the way she'd learned to from a man who never gave a cheap answer to a real question. Because he deserved better than what he got, she said. And because I was tired of being one of the people who make sure good men don't. She looked at June. My father worked with his hands his whole life. Fixed things. And the world decided one day it was done with him, and it threw him away, and it never learned his name. I couldn't save him. Her voice caught just slightly. But I could refuse to be the machine that did it to somebody else. June nodded slowly. Something passed between the two women, some understanding that didn't need more words. Come on, Dad, she said. You promised. Dinner. Once a week. A small, real smile. You're not weaseling out on the first one. I wouldn't dare, Elias said, and Adeline watched them walk to that old car. The same battered sedan, the same dent in the bumper, the same crack. Running the width of the windshield like a river she'd once followed through the dark a lifetime and a season ago. Soon she was chasing a criminal. Everything had changed since that night, except the car. And somehow that was the most beautiful thing about it. 3 months later, Adeline stood on a stage at one of the industry's biggest conferences in front of a room full of the very people who measured a human being in market cap and pedigree, and she told them the truth. We found our chief security architect, she said, cleaning our offices at midnight, not because he wasn't qualified for more, but because the industry had decided he was too honest to be useful. She let that sit. We almost missed him entirely. So I have to ask all of you, how many others are we missing? How many brilliant people are pushing mops through our buildings right now because we never once thought to learn their names? Some applauded. Some shifted in their seats uncomfortable, which was better, because comfort never changed anyone. She showed them the numbers. Small numbers, enormous numbers. 23 kids placed in internships, 5 scholarships, a dozen more still climbing. This isn't charity, she told them. The talent was always there. We just built our whole world to look everywhere except where it lived. Backstage after he was waiting. And beside him, 4 kids from the program here as participants, not visitors. Belonging for the first time to a world that had spent generations telling them they didn't. You did good, Elias said. So what's next for you? She asked. You saved the company twice, caught a thief, built 10 schools, got your daughter back. What mountains left? He laughed, an easy, real laugh. I was thinking about sleeping 8 hours, he said. Maybe taking my daughter somewhere with a beach. Radical stuff, I know. You've earned it. She paused. Place won't be the same without you hovering over everyone's shoulder, making sure they do it right. I'm not going anywhere, he said, surprised. Then he looked out at the kids, at Mia, laughing with an engineer 3 times her senior, at a world cracking open, just wide enough to let them in. Turns out I like it here. Who knew a man could be good at this? Not just the mop. I knew, Adeline said, from the doorway, that first night. You were always meant for this. The industry just took 9 years to figure out what I saw in 5 minutes. She had followed a janitor home one November night, certain she'd find a thief. Instead, she'd found a teacher who taught her how to lead. A whistleblower who showed her what her own father had been made of. and a father who reminded her that all the success in the world means nothing. Nothing at all, if you buy it with your own humanity. She'd started that night trying to protect her company. She'd ended it with something better. A company worth protecting. A city she could finally see. And the quiet, unshakable knowledge that the most valuable thing in any room is almost never the thing everyone is looking at. It's the person in the corner, the one holding the mop, the one nobody bothered to see, until somebody did.